Keepers of the law. The predominant figures in terms of the law were the priests, and especially the high priest. The priests were the mediators from the people of Israel to God. These people would bring sacrifices to the priests, and priests would make sure they were acceptable to God, then offer them to God, and in doing so, the punishment for their sins, which was death, would befall the sacrificed animal rather than the people. And when Israel was wandering in the wilderness, at times Aaron would directly intervene and save Israel when they rebelled against God and came under his judgment. You'll get to read Numbers 16:46 through 50, which is a good example of that later this week. The high priest was the ultimate priest. His most crucial role was to enter the inner room of the temple, the Holy of Holies, once a year with an offering symbolic of all Israel. If the sacrifice was acceptable to God, he would forgive Israel and the high priest would come out alive. If it wasn't acceptable, God would strike the high priest dead instead. As the first high priest, Aaron, Moses' brother, was considered the greatest high priest there ever was. In fact, it was only priests from his line of descendants that could become high priests in Israel. The focal point of the law was the tabernacle, then the temple. The tabernacle was the mobile temple that Israel constructed according to God's precise plans. The temple was the permanent version of the tabernacle that was built in Jerusalem hundreds of years later by Solomon. At the heart of both the tabernacle and the temple was a room called the Holy of Holies. It was a perfect cube, the same in length, width, and height. In the temple, 3 of the 4 walls were pure gold, while the 4th wall, the entrance into the Holy of Holies, was a very thick curtain of purple, blue, and scarlet thread. Some scholars say it was 3 inches thick, some say 6 inches thick, made of multiple curtains sewn together. It contained the Ark of the Covenant of the Law, which was God's dwelling place on earth. Initially, inside the Ark were the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, the symbol of God's holiness. But also inside the Ark was a bowl of manna, the bread that came down from heaven to keep Israel alive, even though they were acting like whiny and ungrateful children. So, this was a symbol of God's provision for his people's needs. The Ark was covered by a top with 2 golden angels spreading their wings towards each other. This was called the mercy seat. It was where Aaron, the high priest after him, would once a year sprinkle blood of the lamb sacrificed for the sins of all the people. While the Holy of Holies and the Ark existed, this was the holiest place on earth, the place where God was said to dwell, his home. And what was at the center, the heart of God's throne on earth? God's holiness, provision, and mercy. This is our God still. The God of the Israelites is our God. When we enter his throne room in worship, a part of us should tremble at his holiness and our sinfulness. But also a part of us can't help but rejoice, because in the heart of his holiness is also found mercy and provision for us, his people. In summary, the law was a gift, a revelation of how to be safely in relationship with a holy God. Listen to these comments by Mike Mason from his book, Champagne for the Soul, pages 17 and 18. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat portions on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted for joy and fell face down. Leviticus 9:24. This verse is the first significant mention of joy in the Bible. The book of Leviticus can seem dull reading, but the results of all these dreary rituals and sacrifice was that the people shouted for joy and fell face down. Why? Because they had received the goal of their faith, to be with God. Fire came down from heaven and consumed their sacrifice, burning away everything that had separated them from God, assuring them that their sins were forgiven and that they were holy. Joy is a response to the Lord's presence. The people rejoiced because God responded to them, kindling their sacrifice. Has the fire of God come down and consumed your sacrifice? All your piety, your church going, your repentance, your efforts to be good, do these produce shouts of joy? If not, something's wrong. Your sacrifice is not complete. What was the purpose of the sacrificial system in the Old Testament? Did the slaughtering of animals bring satisfaction to God? No, for as David prayed, you do not take pleasure in burnt offerings. That's Psalm 51:16. What then did God expect from all these messy sacrifices? He wanted his people to be happy. He wanted them to go away from these rituals feeling joyful and free, knowing that their sins had been dealt with and would not return to haunt them. Unconfessed sin blocks joy. Therefore, the complex details of the sacrificial system were designed to enable people to acknowledge and express sorrow for specific sins. The real goal, however, was not to make the people sorry, but to make them happy. I hope that you enjoyed reading Exodus and Leviticus this week. I hope you learned a lot. And for next week, try and read all of Numbers and Deuteronomy. It's going to be really good, and you'll hear from us again coming up next week. A little talk about that, and I hope you're enjoying Bible literacy, and see you around. Bye!